Colonel Richard Saunders rode the eastern perimeter of his Montana ranch as dawn broke over the Absaroka Range. Summer of 1886 had come in hard and dry, the kind of season that tested a man's resolve and his wells. The grass stood brittle underfoot, and dust devils spun themselves into brief existence across the flats before collapsing back into nothing. He was a man of military bearing, even 6 years removed from service, straight-backed in the saddle, jaw set firm, eyes that scanned terrain the way they'd once scanned battlefields. The Indian Wars had taught him to see landscape as territory claimed or contested, won or lost. This land was his. 700 acres purchased fair and square from the territorial government. Title recorded proper in Helena. His labor had built the ranch house, strung the fences, dug the wells that were now running low. The fence line marked civilization from wilderness. On his side, order; on theirs, remnants. He pulled his horse to a stop where the eastern boundary ran. Beyond the fence, his fence, built with his own money and sweat, sat a small camp of Crow Indians, 3 structures made of canvas and salvaged wood, a cook fire, and a garden that shouldn't have been possible in this drought. A woman knelt among the plants, her hands working soil that yielded to her touch. Walks with birds. His ranch hands called her a widow, they said. Though Saunders gave no thought to her personal circumstances, she was a squatter on land he intended to own completely once the territorial surveyors finished their slow work. Her garden flourished, unfamiliar plants in careful rows, green and vital, while his own kitchen garden had withered to brown stalks. The sight grated against his sense of natural order. Morrison, his oldest hand, rode up alongside him. The man had served under Saunders during the Nez Perce campaign, knew when to speak and when to stay silent. "Well's down another 2 feet, Colonel," Morrison said. "Cook's rationing water for the house. Dig deeper." "Yes, sir." Morrison hesitated. "The Crow woman, she's got a spring on her side. Might be we asked them for nothing." Saunders' voice carried the tone that ended conversations. "Check the western pasture. I want a count of how many head we need to move closer to Sweetwater Creek." Morrison touched his hat brim and rode off. Saunders sat his horse a moment longer. Studying the camp, the woman looked up, met his gaze across the fence line with perfect stillness. No deference, no fear, just acknowledgement that he was there and she was unmoved by it. He turned his horse back toward the ranch house. They had to go. Not through violence, he was a civilized man. Not a savage, but through proper legal channels. The territorial government owed him that much. He'd fought their wars, cleared their land of hostiles. This last obstacle would be removed like all the others. By month's end, he told himself. By month's end, the boundary would mean what it was supposed to mean. He crossed the fence line 3 days later with Morrison and young Hendricks as witnesses. The morning sun already promised another scorching day. Heat rising in waves off the hard ground. Walks with Birds was harvesting something from her garden, her movements efficient and knowing. She stood as they approached, a basket of roots balanced on her hip. "You need to leave," Saunders said without preamble. "This land will be part of my ranch by autumn. I'm giving you fair warning to pack up and move on." She set the basket down carefully. "This land held my people before any fence existed. Colonel Saunders, we have lived here since before your government drew its lines." Her English was clear. Unaccented, it unsettled him in ways he didn't examine. "Your people lost the right to this land through conquest," he said. "That's how the world works. The strong prevail. The weak make room. I fought in those wars. I saw what your people did to settlers, to soldiers. I will not have savages squatting on land that belongs to civilization. What grows in your garden, Colonel?" The question caught him sideways. "What? Your garden? What grows there?" "That's none of your concern. Mine grows," she said simply, "even in drought, because I know this land. I know what it gives and what it requires. Your people are still learning." Morrison shifted in his saddle. Hendricks kept his eyes down. Saunders felt his face flush. "You'll leave, or I'll find legal means to remove you. The territorial government." "Move slowly," she said, "and your claim is contested. The survey is incomplete. You have no authority to order us anywhere." "Colonel," Only the wish that you did. He wanted to argue, to assert the rightness of his position through force of will, but she was correct about the legal standing. Damn her. The survey team had promised completion by fall, but government promises were written in water. "You won't be here by winter," he said finally. "We will be here long after winter. Colonel, long after you and I are both dust. This land remembers all of us and forgets none." He turned his horse sharply, his men following. Behind them, he heard her return to her work, the sound of her digging in soil that should have been barren. Morrison rode in silence until they were well away from the camp. "Colonel, I've seen her cures work. When Hendricks took that snake bite last summer, I don't want to hear it." "Yes, sir," but Saunders had heard it anyway. Another seed of resentment planted. Another reason to see them gone. They undermined his authority simply by existing, by thriving where he struggled, by knowing what he didn't. There was always a way to move Indians. The whole history of the frontier proved it. He just needed to find the leverage, apply the pressure in the right place. He'd learned patience in the army. He could wait. Emily fell ill on a Tuesday morning in late July. Catherine found her in bed, fever-bright and shivering despite the heat. Their daughter, 8 years old, spirited and curious, lay curled on her side, her skin pale beneath the flush of sickness. "Richard," Catherine called down the stairs. "Something's wrong with Emily." He came up to find his wife sponging their daughter's forehead with cool water. Emily's eyes were half closed, unfocused. "Fetch Dr. Brennan," he told Morrison, who'd come to the house for morning orders. "Ride hard." The doctor arrived by late afternoon. A lean man with a weathered face who'd seen every frontier ailment twice. He examined Emily with thoroughness, asked questions, felt her pulse, looked into her eyes and throat. "Fever's high," Brennan said. "Could be any number of things. I'll give you laudanum for the pain, and you'll want to keep her cool. Sponge baths every few hours. If it's an infection, it should break in a few days." It didn't break. By Friday, as Emily was worse, convulsions seized her small body. Her skin had gone gray-pale, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Catherine sent for Dr. Pemberton from Fort Benton, 30 miles north. Pemberton arrived Saturday evening and examined Emily and shook his head. "I've seen symptoms like this before," he said. "Brain fever, possibly, or consumption, without knowing the cause. I can't prescribe treatment beyond what Brennan already suggested. Keep her comfortable. Pray." "That's all you can offer?" Saunders demanded. "Prayer." "I'm a doctor, Colonel, not a miracle worker. Medicine has limits." Saunders stood in the doorway of Emily's room that night, unable to enter. Catherine sat by their daughter's bedside, holding a small hand that seemed to grow smaller each day. The sound of Emily's labored breathing filled the house. He went downstairs, poured whiskey, sat in his study with maps and account books he couldn't focus on. Control was slipping. The drought, the contested land, the Indians who wouldn't leave, and now this, his daughter suffering while doctors shrugged and suggested prayer. In the kitchen, he heard the cook, Mrs. Brennan, no relation to the doctor, speaking quietly with Catherine. "My sister's youngest had symptoms like that," Mrs. Brennan was saying. "Turned out she'd eaten something poisonous, water hemlock root. They think looks like wild carrot to a child." "The doctors didn't mention poison," Catherine said. "Frontier doctors know bullets and fever, plant poisoning. That's Indian knowledge." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Where would I find someone who knows?" Saunders set down his glass, listening. "The Crow woman across the fence," Mrs. Brennan said. "She's a healer. Fixed Hendricks's snake bite. Cured Morrison's infected hand last winter. Ranch hands swear by her, though they don't say so in front of the colonel." He should have gone into the kitchen, ended that conversation before it grew roots. Instead, he sat in his study, the whiskey bitter on his tongue, and said nothing. Later, he found Catherine at the window, looking out across the dark land toward where a faint glow marked the Crow camp's fire. "Modern medicine will prevail," he said. She didn't turn from the window. "And if it doesn't, it will." But in Emily's room, their daughter's breathing grew more labored, and the night stretched long and merciless. Catherine waited until Richard rode out to check the far pastures. He'd been going every morning now, staying gone for hours, avoiding the house where his daughter was dying, she thought, though she didn't say it aloud. She stood at the kitchen window, watching until he was a speck against the horizon. Then she removed her apron, told Mrs. Brennan to watch Emily, and walked out the back door. The fence line marked more than property. It marked the boundary of everything she'd been taught about civilization and savagery, about proper society and dangerous others. Her husband had spoken with such certainty about Indians, their violence, their backwardness, their place in a world that had moved past them. But Emily was dying, and certainty wasn't saving her. She crossed the fence where a gap existed, the wire pushed down by cattle or time. The walk to the camp took only minutes, but it felt like crossing into another country, up close. The camp revealed itself as more organized than she'd imagined. Drying herbs hung from lines strung between poles. Tools lay arranged near the fire pit. The garden spread in careful rows, each plant labeled in a language she didn't recognize. Walks with birds emerged from one of the structures, showed no surprise at Catherine's presence. "Mrs. Saunders," she said, a statement, not a question. "My daughter is sick." Catherine's voice trembled despite her effort at control. "The doctors can't help her. Our cook said you might know. Tell me her symptoms." Catherine described everything: the fever, the convulsions, the gray pallor. The way Emily's breathing had become labored and her heartbeat irregular. Walks with birds listened with complete attention, asked specific questions. Where had Emily been playing? What had she eaten? Had she been near the creek water hemlock? Walks with birds said finally, "Children mistake the root for wild carrot. It's deadly if not treated quickly." "How long has she been sick?" 5 days. "The poison is advanced, but there's time. I can prepare a remedy. It will purge the toxin and strengthen her heart, but the dosing must be precise. Too little, and it won't work. Too much. And..." She paused. "You understand?" "I understand." Walks with birds moved to her garden. Selected plants with practiced certainty. Her hands worked quickly, crushing, grinding, mixing in proportions that spoke of deep knowledge. This root, boiled until the water turns dark, 1 spoonful every 4 hours, no more. The bark, made into tea. Give it between the root doses. The tea will help her body accept the medicine. She wrapped the preparations in cloth, placed them in Catherine's hands. "Your husband will object," Walks with Birds said. "He doesn't have to know. He'll smell it. Bitter herbs carry strong medicine and strong smell." Catherine met her eyes. "Then I'll deal with that when it comes." Walking back across the boundary, the medicine hidden beneath her shawl, Catherine felt like a thief, or perhaps like a mother doing what mothers did, protecting her child by any means necessary, even means that would shatter her husband's pride. She administered the first dose after dark, while Richard was in his study. Emily grimaced at the bitter taste but swallowed. Catherine held her daughter's hand and prayed to a God who seemed distant as stars. In the morning, Richard came to Emily's room to check on her before riding out. He stopped in the doorway, his nose wrinkling. "What's that smell?" Catherine's hand stilled on the cloth she was folding. "What smell?" "Bitter. Medicinal. Not like anything Brennan prescribed." He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning. "Catherine, what did you give her?" The moment stretched. The truth sat between them like an uninvited guest. "I went to the Crow woman," Catherine said quietly. "She identified the illness as poison water hemlock. She gave me medicine." The color drained from Richard's face, then flooded back as rage. "You went to them?" His voice started low, military control barely containing fury. "You brought their savage remedies into my house to my daughter." Catherine stood, placing herself between Richard and Emily's bed. "The doctors failed. She's dying. I did what any mother would do. Any mother would trust civilized medicine by it, not..." He stopped himself, breathing hard. "Where is it, this poison you're feeding her?" "It's not poison. It's medicine, made from plants, carefully prepared. I don't care if it's made from angel wings. You will not give my daughter Indian remedies. Do you understand me, Richard? Listen, where is it?" Catherine's hands clenched into fists. "In my sewing basket. Downstairs. But you can't." He was already moving, boots loud on the stairs. She followed, found him in the parlor with the basket open, the wrapped herbs in his hands. "5 days of doctors, of modern medicine," he said, "and you throw it all away for this. For savagery." "For hope," Catherine said. "For something that might work when everything else has failed." He walked to the front door, opened it, strode out into the yard. Catherine ran after him, watched in horror as he unwrapped the medicines and poured them onto the ground. The dark liquid soaked into dust, the precious bark and roots scattered. "No." She reached for them, but he blocked her. "You will not cross that fence again," he said. "You will not seek help from Indians. You will act like a civilized woman and wife and trust in proper medicine. Is that clear?" "She's dying, Richard. Then she dies clean, in her own bed, with her dignity intact, not polluted by savage rituals." The words hung between them. Catherine stared at her husband as though seeing him for the first time, truly seeing him, past the uniform and the authority and the certainty. "You'd rather she die," Catherine said slowly, "than be saved by someone you've decided is beneath you. I'd rather she die than live knowing her father betrayed everything he fought for." Yes, he said it like a military order. Simple, final, the truth of him laid bare. Catherine felt something break inside her chest. Not her love for him that was more complicated than breaking, but her belief that love could overcome what lived in his heart. "Get inside," Richard said. "Send for another doctor, and there are men in Bozeman who might. No doctor will come in time. Then we'll do what we can with what we have." He turned back to the house. "And Catherine, if you cross that fence again, I'll lock you in your room until this is over. Don't test me." She watched him go inside, this man she'd married, this stranger in her husband's skin, in Emily's room. Their daughter struggled for each breath. The single dose of medicine Catherine had given her the night before, the only dose she'd been able to administer, worked through a small body fighting for life. Catherine stood at the window of the sick room, looking out across the boundary line. The sun beat down merciless on drought-cracked earth. In the distance, heat shimmer made the horizon dance and dissolve. She made a decision then, though she didn't speak it aloud. Some things a mother did in silence. Word spread among the ranch hands the way word always spread in close quarters quietly, between men who worked together and trusted each other more than they trusted the man who paid them. Morrison heard it from Hendricks. Hendricks had heard it from the cook. Mrs. Brennan never could keep her opinions to herself. God bless her. The colonel had destroyed medicine that might have saved his daughter, poured it out like slop, forbidden his wife from seeking more. The men said nothing at first. They repaired fence, moved cattle, dug deeper into the well shaft that yielded less water each day. But the knowledge sat among them like a stone in bread. Morrison had served with Colonel Saunders during the Nez Perce campaign. He'd seen the man in battle brave, strategic, willing to lead from the front. He'd also seen what came after battles. The way Saunders spoke about the people they'd fought, not as warriors or enemies, but as vermin to be cleared. It had bothered Morrison then. It bothered him more now. On the 3rd day after the medicine was destroyed, Morrison found the colonel checking water levels in the main holding tank. "Colonel, might I have a word?" Saunders looked up, his face showing the strain of sleepless nights. "What is it?" "Morrison. It's about the Crow woman's medicine, sir. I've seen her work. When I had that hand infection 2 winters back, she gave me a poultice that drew the poison out in 2 days. Saved my hand, probably saved my arm, and when Hendricks took that rattlesnake bite, I don't recall asking your opinion on this matter. Nope, sir, but that's your daughter up there, and if there's something that might help. Morrison," the colonel's voice went flat and hard, "you're a good man. You've worked this ranch for 4 years without complaint. Don't make me question your judgment now." Morrison met his eyes, saw no opening there. "Yes, sir." He walked back to where Hendricks and 2 other hands were repairing a section of fence. They looked at him, questions in their faces. "No good," Morrison said quietly. That evening, Catherine appeared in the doorway of Emily's room carrying their daughter. The child was a limp weight in her arms, breathing so shallow it barely moved her chest. She walked down the stairs without speaking, entered Richard's study where he sat with whiskey and paperwork. "Look at her," Catherine said. Richard glanced up, then quickly away. "She should be in bed. Look at her." "Richard, look at what your pride is doing. I won't be manipulated by, she's dying." Catherine's voice broke. "Our daughter is dying, and you're sitting here with your whiskey and your righteousness while the only thing that might save her is across that fence. And you won't allow it because you can't bear to admit you might be wrong about something. Take her back to bed." "I'm taking her to someone who can help. You'll do no such thing." He stood, military authority snapping into place. "I forbid it." "Then forbid it," Catherine said. "Lock me in my room, tie me up, do whatever you think your authority allows. But know this when she dies, and she will die if nothing changes. You'll carry that every day for the rest of your life. You'll know you chose pride over your own daughter." She turned and walked out of the study, carrying Emily back upstairs. Richard stood alone in the room that suddenly felt too small and too large at once. The whiskey glass sat on his desk. His reflection stared back from the darkened window. He poured another drink, trying to drown the voice in his head that sounded too much like Catherine's truth. Outside, the drought continued. The land cracked open, waiting for rain that wouldn't come. Richard woke in darkness to an empty bed. Catherine's side was cold, the sheets undisturbed. He sat up, sudden clarity cutting through sleep. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too still. He pulled on trousers and boots, moved quickly to Emily's room. The bed was empty. Ours thrown back, his daughter's rag doll lay on the pillow. Abandoned. Fear replaced rage pure. Simple terror of a father who'd been so certain and now faced the unknown. He ran downstairs, through the house, out the front door. The night was clear and cool. Stars scattered thick across the sky in the distance, across the boundary line. Lamplight glowed warm in the crow camp. The walk across that fence line was the longest journey of Richard Saunders' life. Every step violated something he'd built his identity upon: military discipline, racial superiority, the certainty that he knew better, had fought harder. Deserved more than the people he'd helped drive from their lands. His boots crunched on dry grass. The lamp grew closer. He could hear singing, low and rhythmic, words in a language he didn't know. He arrived at the camp's edge, stopped by what he saw. Emily lay on a blanket inside an open shelter, Catherine kneeling beside her. Walks with Bird sat across from them, crushing something in a stone bowl while she sang. The lamplight caught her hands. Sure and knowing, working with generations of knowledge that Richard had spent his adult life dismissing as primitive. His first impulse was to grab his daughter and run, to assert his authority through force, to drag them back across the boundary and lock them in where his rules still meant something. But Walks with Birds looked up before he could speak, her eyes meeting his in the lamplight. "She is dying, Colonel T." Walks with Birds said quietly, "My medicine can save her. Your pride can bury her. Choose." The word choose hit him like a rifle shot. He'd made choices all his life: to join the army, to fight in the Indian Wars, to see the people he fought as less than human, because seeing them as human would have made the killing unbearable, to build his identity on the bedrock of those choices, each one reinforcing the last until he couldn't question any without questioning all. Now his daughter's life hung in the balance of one more choice. He felt something break inside him, not cleanly, not mercifully, but with the ragged tearing of foundations pulled apart. His military bearing collapsed, his certainty crumbled. The man who'd commanded soldiers, who'd believed absolutely in his own moral superiority, fell to his knees on foreign ground. "Save her!" His voice came out broken. "Please, save her." The word "please" felt foreign in his mouth. How long since he'd asked instead of ordered? How long since he'd admitted he needed something from someone he'd considered beneath him? Walks with Bird studied him for a long moment, then nodded, not in triumph, not in judgment, simply acknowledgement that he'd finally spoken truth. She returned to her work, grinding herbs with practiced precision. "This will purge the remaining poison," she said, speaking to Catherine but allowing Richard to hear. "Her body is weak. The medicine is strong. She will suffer before she heals. I understand, Catherine said. Richard crawled forward. Staying on his knees, he reached for Emily's small hand, found it burning with fever. His daughter's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and irregular. I'm sorry, he whispered, to Emily, to Catherine, to the woman working to save a child while the child's father had tried to stop her. I'm so sorry. Walks with Birds mixed the crushed herbs with water. Brought the cup to Emily's lips. Catherine helped tilt their daughter's head, coaxing her to swallow. Richard watched, useless and broken, and as the medicine went down, he'd spent years believing he knew better than everyone, especially people like Walks with Birds. Now he knelt in her camp, his daughter's life in her hands, every certainty he'd ever held turning to dust. The night stretched long and dark. Walks with Birds sang while she worked, preparing additional remedies, checking Emily's pulse, monitoring her breathing. Catherine stayed close to their daughter. Richard remained on his knees, afraid to move, afraid that any assertion of himself would shatter whatever grace had been extended. Toward dawn, Emily stirred, her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then slowly clearing. Mama. Her voice was barely a whisper. Catherine sobbed once, pressed her face to Emily's hand. I'm here, sweetheart. Mama's here. Emily's gaze found Richard. Papa. I'm here too, he managed. I'm here. The fever hadn't broken yet, but something had shifted. Color returned to Emily's cheeks. Her breathing came easier. Walks with Birds sat back, satisfied with what she saw. The worst is past. She'll need rest, more medicine, careful watching, but she'll live. Richard looked at this woman, this healer, this keeper of knowledge he'd scorned, and saw her clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the enemy from his nightmares, not as the savage from his prejudices, but as a human being with skills and wisdom he didn't possess. Thank you, he said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Walks with Birds met his eyes. Your gratitude is noted, but gratitude changes nothing unless it changes you. She stood, moved to prepare tea. Richard remained kneeling, his whole world rearranging itself around this moment, this place, this terrible and necessary breaking. Richard stayed in the camp as dawn broke over the Absaroka Range. The lamplight gave way to gray morning, then to golden sunrise that painted the mountains in shades of copper and rose. Emily slept peacefully now, the fever diminishing hour by hour. Catherine dozed beside her, exhausted from nights of worry. Richard sat against a support pole of the shelter, watching Walks with Birds work. She moved between her garden and the fire, preparing more medicine. Her hands never hesitated, selecting plants with certainty born from knowledge passed down through generations. What are those? Richard asked, his voice hoarse. Walks with Birds glanced at him, seemed to consider whether he was worthy of teaching. Then she spoke. This is cone flower. It strengthens the body's defenses. The root, dried and powdered, can prevent infection. She moved to another plant. This is willow bark for pain and fever. Your people's doctors use a substance called aspirin now, but it comes from willow. We've known this for centuries. She continued her work, naming each plant, explaining its use. Richard listened with the humility of a man who'd discovered how little he actually knew. My daughter ate water hemlock, he said. How did you know? The symptoms were clear to anyone trained to read them. Water hemlock causes convulsions, rapid heartbeat, difficulty breathing. Your frontier doctors know bullets and broken bones. They don't study plants. She paused. My mother taught me. Her mother taught her, back through generations to times before your people came to this land. Why help us? Richard asked. After everything I said to you, after I tried to force you off this land. Walks with Birds was quiet for a moment, tending the fire. When she spoke, her voice carried weight. I am a healer. That is my calling, given to me by my mother and by the spirits of this land when I see suffering. I act to relieve it if I can. Your hatred of my people doesn't change my obligation to heal." She sat across from him, tea steeping between them. "You fought against the crow," she said. It wasn't a question. "Nez Perce," Richard said. 90 days of pursuit through Montana and Idaho. We caught them 40 miles from the Canadian border. Chief Joseph surrendered rather than see more of his people killed. You saw us as savages." "Yes. And now?" Richard looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully. He looked at Catherine, who'd defied him to save their child. He looked at this woman who'd possessed the knowledge and the mercy to heal when he'd only possessed pride. "Now I don't know what I see," he said honestly, "except that I was wrong. About you, about medicine, about—" He stopped, the words catching, "about nearly everything. Being wrong is not the tragedy," Walks with Birds said. "Staying wrong when truth is offered, that is where harm grows." And she poured tea, handed him a cup. He took it, this bitter medicine that was also a kind of communion. "My people lived in the Yellowstone Valley for generations," she said. "We knew every plant, every animal, every season's rhythm. Then your government wanted the land for settlers, for cattle, for gold. They moved us to reservations. Many died. Those who survived lost the land that held our history." Richard wanted to look away from the truth of it, but forced himself to listen. "I came here because this small piece of land is close to the old places. My husband died on the reservation, from diseases that came with crowding and despair. My children are grown, scattered. I have my knowledge, but my garden, and this land that remembers my people, even if your government's maps don't acknowledge us." "I'm sorry," Richard said, "for what was done, for what I contributed to." "Your sorrow is noted," she said, echoing her earlier words. "But sorrow, like gratitude, means nothing unless it changes you." They sat in silence as the sun rose higher. Emily stirred, opened her eyes, and smiled weakly at her mother. Catherine woke fully, checked their daughter with a mother's practiced assessment, and met Richard's eyes across the shelter. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Clouds gathered over the mountains, dark and promising, rain coming. Walks with Birds said, "The drought breaks." Richard stepped out of the shelter, looked up at the sky. The first drops fell cold and blessed on his upturned face. Within minutes, it was pouring heavy rain that soaked into parched earth, filled dry creek beds, washed dust from the air. He stood in it, letting it drench him, feeling like a man being baptized into a new understanding. Not absolution, he didn't deserve that, but the possibility of change, the responsibility to try. Behind him, in the shelter. Walks with Birds sang softly while Emily rested, and Catherine watched the rain with relief written on her tired face. The land drank deep, and Richard Saunders stood on the boundary between the man he'd been and the man he might become. 3 weeks later, Richard rode the eastern perimeter of his ranch as dawn broke over the Absaroka Range. The land had transformed since the rains came, green shoots pushing up through soil that remembered how to give life. Creek beds running clear. Cattle spread across pastures that could sustain them again. He stopped where the fence line ran, where he'd stopped that first morning back in July. But everything looked different now. Or perhaps he looked different, and the land simply revealed what had always been there. The fence seemed absurd, an arrogant line drawn across continuous earth, pretending to divide what belonged to itself. He could see Walks with Birds in her garden, tending plants that would heal, that would teach, that held knowledge his people were only beginning to understand. Emily played near the camp, her health fully restored. She laughed at something one of the Crow children showed her, some game Richard didn't recognize. Some shared language of childhood that needed no translation. Her recovery had been slow but complete, and with it had come a fearlessness about crossing the boundary that her father was only beginning to learn. Catherine emerged from one of the shelters, a basket of herbs on her arm. She'd been learning from Walks with Birds, spending hours in the camp while Richard managed the ranch. Their marriage was rebuilding, but differently now, built on truth instead of obedience, on shared purpose instead of his authority. Last week, he'd written to the territorial officials in Helena, not to push for eviction, but to advocate for recognizing the Crow family's claim, he'd visited neighboring ranchers, spoken carefully about the value of indigenous knowledge, the need to respect prior claims to land. The conversations had been difficult. Some men had listened, others had looked at him like he'd gone soft, wanting his spine, let them think what they wanted. He'd built his identity on their approval once, not anymore. Morrison rode up, touched his hat brim in greeting. "Morning, Colonel." "Morning, how's the South well?" "Holding steady. That spot Walks with Birds suggested she was right about the water table. We hit a strong flow at 20 feet. Richard nodded. He'd swallowed his pride enough to ask for advice about well placement. The Crow woman had walked his land with him, reading signs he'd never learned to see, pointing out where water ran deep beneath the surface. "Take Hendricks and check the fence line along Sweetwater Creek," Richard said. "Any sections that need replacing, mark them. We'll get to repairs next week." Morrison hesitated. "Including the eastern boundary, sir?" Richard looked at the fence between his ranch and the camp. He'd been thinking about that section for days. "No," he said. "The eastern boundary comes down." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Sir, you heard me. Take it down. All of it. That land, it was never mine to fence." "Yes, sir." Morrison's face showed something Richard hadn't seen there in months. Respect. Not the respect given to rank or authority, but the harder kind earned through change. "I'll get the men on it this afternoon." After Morrison rode off, Richard dismounted. He pulled work gloves from his saddlebag, walked to the nearest fence post, and started digging around its base. The work was hard, satisfying. Each post pulled free felt like removing a marker of his old certainty, his old conviction that the world divided cleanly into his and theirs. Civilized and savage, right and wrong. Walks with Birds approached as he worked, watching him struggle with the stubborn posts. "Your pride built that fence," she observed. "My fear built it," Richard corrected. "Fear that I was wrong. Fear that the people I'd fought and killed were human in all the ways I was human. Fear that if I admitted that, I'd have to face what I'd done." She was quiet for a moment, and now I face it. He pulled another post free, set it aside. "I can't undo the past, can't bring back your husband or the others who died, can't restore the Yellowstone Valley to your people, but I can stop adding to the harm. I can learn. I can use whatever influence I have to protect instead of destroy." "That is a beginning," Walks with Birds said. Not absolution, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement that he'd taken the first steps on a long road. Emily ran over, her dress muddy from playing. "Papa, look." She held out a plant. "This is yarrow. It stops bleeding." Richard took the plant carefully. Examined it. "That's good to know." "Sweetheart, can we plant some in our garden?" Emily asked. "I think that's an excellent idea." Emily hugged him quickly, then ran back to her new friends. Richard watched her go. This daughter who'd almost died because of his pride. Now learning the knowledge that had saved her life, Catherine joined him at the fence line, stood close. They didn't speak for a while, just watched the land together. "Morrison says you're taking the fence down," she said eventually. "It shouldn't have been built." "No," she agreed. "It shouldn't have." She took his hand. The gesture was tentative. They were still finding their way back to each other, but the touch was real, and Richard held on to it. Walks with Birds returned to her shelter, came back with a wooden cup. "Tea," she said, offering it to Richard. "Mint and elderflower, for clear thinking." He accepted it. This medicine that was also ceremony. The tea was slightly sweet, refreshing in the morning heat. "Thank you," he said, "for this, for Emily, for teaching instead of condemning. I told you before healing is my calling." She paused. "But you're welcome." They stood together on land that belonged to all of them, and none of them. Land that would outlast their brief lives and remember them only as part of the long story it told. Richard pulled another fence post free. The boundary that had seemed so necessary 3 weeks ago now lay in pieces on the ground, and in its place, something new was growing. Not forgiveness that wasn't his to receive, not absolution that wasn't available for what he'd done, but the possibility of change, the responsibility to learn, the commitment to do better with the days he had left. He took another drink of tea, bitter and sweet at once, and got back to work. The sun rose higher. Rain clouds gathered again over the distant mountains, and on the land between the ranch and the camp, between the past and the future, the boundary erased itself one post at a time.